So in this next section, we're going to focus on using library content in order to add detail to our plan and enhance the scene. So the question is, why would we virtually stage the home if you're not an interior designer? So if your job is not to design the interior space, but to design the home in general, why is it helpful to stage the home? And how can we do so in an efficient way? So as we well know, many clients need to be able to see themselves in the home. Using close to their current setup in a remodel can be a really nice touch to set you above competition. And for a new home build, it can really give them a better sense of what it will be like to live there, to visualize the space in action. And for many clients, it can really make the difference in selling them the home. So when we're talking about library items, we have basically three core places or sources that we can retrieve content. The first would of course be our core catalogs, so what comes installed already in the program. The second will be our bonus and manufacturer content, which is going to include a number of catalogs of grouped rooms. Now for builders that are not concerned about designing the home but just want to give a general idea, these grouped rooms can really save you time, and I'll show you how a little bit later. And then finally we have outside sources. So if we're not finding content in Chief's plethora of options, then we can definitely go to outside sources. And some of those would be manufacturer sites. Many of them will offer DWGs or 3DS versions of their content, and we can import those in. And then we also have Trimble's 3D Warehouse, which is a great source for finding additional content and importing those in, and I'll kind of walk you through the process of that a little bit later. And I just wanted to use this little graphic to illustrate that the blue is our core content total by percentage of overall content that we offer. Our manufacturer and bonus are going to comprise 90%, over 90% of the content that we offer. So if you're not going and downloading those, you are seriously missing out on a lot of additional objects and materials for you to be able to use within your plan. Now I just wanted to give you a quick sample. In this particular image, we have 6 different objects that are imported from outside sources. Now this was a good case for going to look for outside sources because an Old English Tudor home is going to be a very specific style, and so there may not be content that we can use. Much of this is content from Chief, but details like the trunk and these spindle chairs and the couches that we used, as well as this British painting in the background, those are additional details that really enhance the overall theme of the home and give it more detail for the client. Now let's open up the program really quickly. So I want to go through our library. So here we have our catalogs that are core, bonus, and manufacturer, which are going to be preloaded. The core are going to be preloaded, and the bonus and manufacturer are available right on our website. Then we have the user catalog. This is where all of our imported content is going to land, and this is also where we can copy and paste from our previous catalogs and save here. When we go over materials a little bit later, I'm going to be going into the user catalog in a lot more depth, but for right now you can just know that it exists, and we'll discuss it a little later. So now I want to highlight this search bar. Because if our focus right now is on efficiency, we're not wanting to be pouring through thousands of different items in all of our catalogs to find content. We want to be able to search for something quickly and easily. So we can type in something as simple as chair and see what comes up. We do have filters that you can set up so that you can have basic search settings already pre-designed. So if we open these up, you can see it's specific to what catalogs we're going to be searching through. So for instance, if you know that you use maybe Aristocraft and Anderson, and those are the only ones that you use, you can select those, and then when you search for particular cabinets, you know that you're only going to find those. However, we also have this search option, and this is going to help us narrow down very quickly what we're looking for. If we typed in a very specific name of an object, we're looking for something that we know is there, and we wrote the exact name, we can check this entire word. If we want to be searching within folders, we can select that. We can also search based on type. So by default, it's going to be looking at all types of objects. That includes materials as well as millwork and electrical and windows. But if we're searching for a chair, we know that we're probably going to be looking at interior and possibly exterior furnishings. So that's going to narrow in our options considerably, so that now we're only looking at applicable objects. This would be especially useful if we were searching for something like rose, and we definitely don't want 12,000 different colors that are named rose to come up in our library. Now in X8, we're going to have a little bit of additional functionality. First of all, the library is going to sort exact matches on top, so that if we searched for comfort side chair, that's going to come up first as opposed to all of the objects that happen to have that word in there. So now getting back into our library, in our bonus catalogs, we have a number of grouped rooms. So here's all of our group room folders. I'm going to show you how helpful this is. So let's say we decide we want this space to be our master bedroom. So I'm just going to quickly partition a couple of rooms here. We're going to have our bathroom and our closet, and then we want this space to be our master bedroom. We have a number of grouped bedrooms here, so we can select that to get an overview of the folder. We also have one that's just called Rustic Master Bedroom. Well, that sounds perfect because I'm doing a rustic style home. So I can select that, I can see a preview of it, and then simply click within my space, which is going to drop that room in there, readjust it here into place, and now when I take a 3D view of this room, we already have a space pre-designed and ready for us, so we did not have to search for each and every object to place in here. It's already laid out. Now of course we can make changes. If we go back to our floor plan, this is a block which can be unblocked. And once we do so, we can, for instance, move this back into the corner, maybe move this rug up a bit, move these two over, and set those so they're not right in front of the window. But it's much simpler than if we were having to search for each individually. It just makes it quick and easy to get a layout, and this is going to be a much more effective use of our space than a blank room would be. It's going to sell the job much better than if we had nothing in there. So we have a lot of flexibility within our Chief Architect designs to do something very basic and efficient, like placing objects, like placing a grouped room, or like importing content. So if we're wanting to import content from an outside source, here would be our 3D warehouse. So if we're importing from 3D warehouse, there's a few things that you should pay attention to before you select an object. First off, we want to pay attention to the polygons. This is going to be indicative of the number of surfaces used. So the larger this number, the more surfaces the object has, and the more it's going to slow down your rendering as a whole. So if you have a ton of objects with 50,000 in polygons here, that's going to significantly slow down your rendering and possibly even limit your ability to open a 3D view. You also want to take a look at the number of materials that they're using, because a great SketchUp object is going to have multiple materials. This one has the one, which means that we can place one material onto it. In the design that we're using, that's not a huge deal, but there are some where that would be very limiting, because this is not a material that I'm wanting to be using in my plan. So then, once we've downloaded it from 3D Warehouse, we can import it. And when we choose to import a 3D symbol, this is the dialog we're going to get. We want to select the correct category, because if we're importing a light, we definitely don't want it to be in the furnishings layer, and we don't want it to have the properties of a furniture item. We also will typically always want to add the symbol to the library, unless you're truly not ever wanting to use it again in the future. And then I will typically select Show Advanced Options, which is going to, when we select OK, immediately open our symbol specification. Now sometimes you may want to test out the item before you adjust it, because sometimes these objects are going to come in much larger or much smaller than they should typically be within a plan, in which case you're going to want to adjust the dimensions before we change our symbol. That also might be a great case for not adding the symbol to the library. So when we are looking at our symbol specification, which we have for every object in our library, every single object we can, I'm going to go back to our plan here really quickly. If we select this same couch, here's where we're going to find our symbol specification. This is different than our open object. It has very different properties. So the open object is going to be the basic dimensions and materials for this object within the plan. This is going to adjust how we can edit the object. So going back, the first thing we're going to look at is the 3D geometry of it, which should already be set up by importing it. So there's typically not a whole lot we need to do here. Sometimes the bounding boxes are a little off, and so you want to offset the origin, but that's not usually that important. I have imported objects where it's been rotated in the wrong direction, so you can definitely rotate it here. So if it's laying on its side, we're going to adjust that by rotating it 90 degrees. Then we're going to go down to our options, which is going to specify how we can place it. So if we're using an accessory that we're going to want to be placing onto tables and cabinets, then we're definitely going to want to have our secondary placement be can sit on base or table. If we've imported an electrical pendant or chandelier, then we're definitely going to want it to be ceiling mounted. So this is going to change how we can initially place it, although of course we can always open up the object and edit the placement afterwards. But this is just going to save you a lot of time in the long run. Then we can change our materials. So when we're talking about materials from 3D Warehouse, they treat materials often very different than we do. So as you can see, this looks different. Our materials would typically be a swatch of that fabric. Theirs is an overall view of the chair. So that's something to keep in mind. We're not going to really be able to use this material for other things within our plan, but we still can adjust the material of this chair. So finally, we're going to look at our sizing. Now this bounding box dimensions is not how we edit the dimension of the object. It's simply going to address the box around it. So there's an invisible box around every object within Chief Architect. That's why if you've ever tried to place a pillow on top of a couch, it's going to want to put it up here because it sees the bounding box as on top of the highest point of that couch. And then we have our stretch planes. These are going to be very important if we're going to be adjusting the size of this couch. So if we want it to become a love seat, we're going to create a width stretch plane so we can stretch it down the middle and increase it without changing the width of our arms or legs of the chair. Same with depth and height. Now when we're thinking about stretch planes, we always want to focus on this dot. This is where all stretch planes begin from. So the back, middle, bottom of the object is the magical stretch plane beginning point. So if we're going to break this down a little further, if we're talking about adjusting the width of the object along the x-axis, so we'll go back here, we're talking about this stretch plane. If we're going to put a positive number here, that means that we're going to be drawing a line down the right side of the object. So for each positive number, we're moving 1 inch away from the center towards the right-hand side. For each negative number, we're moving towards the left-hand side. For the depth, we're talking everything coming from the back. So if we're looking at the y-axis, that means that every number that we input here is going to be a negative number. Our y-axis stretch plane is always going to be a negative number. So for each number, we're moving further down from the back. So if we want to stretch this portion and make it more like a chaise lounge, then we would put a stretch plane at, let's say this is 30 inches. negative 28 inches, and it's going to stretch from that point and maintain everything above and below it the same way. Now the height, we're talking from the bottom, so everything you put in for the z-axis stretch plane is going to be a positive number. So just to review this, the x-axis can be either a negative or a positive number depending upon where on the x-axis you're wanting to stretch the width. The y-axis is always going to be a negative number, and the height, or the z-axis, is always going to be a positive number. So to show you this, we'll put in a 1-inch stretch plane on the z-axis, and you can see it's 38 inches high typically. We'll raise that to 46 inches, and you can see how it's going to stretch it. So it just took that line and it stretched it the 8 inches that we moved that up. So it maintained everything else about the object but simply stretched that one point. Now we can do this for objects existing within the program already just as easily as we can do this for objects that we're importing. So just like I showed you before, you can always edit the symbol properties from one that's already there, or if we find, what were we looking at here? Oh, that's a grouped room. We don't want to grab that. Let's just grab a furniture item here since we've already been looking at our chairs. We'll take an armchair, and we can always simply copy it and then paste it into our user library, which then allows us to edit the symbol properties for that object as a whole. Now with X8, we're going to be able to edit the symbol properties of objects in the other libraries as well, which means that if you know that every time you use this library chair, you want it to have different properties than what we've set up, you'll be able to do so from within the library. Another fun X8 feature, we're going to be able to export the user catalog as a whole so that you can more easily back that up and then migrate it to other computers. So now I just want to give one last effect here. So I want to show you the scene that we looked at earlier with our render. So here is that same scene without staging. This scene, of course, has value. There's a lot of detail here that you definitely might want to be able to point out to them. However, adding in content just gives it a very different effect. It allows the client to visualize the home in a way that this scene does not. It allows them to picture themselves eating in the dining room, entertaining friends in the living room, or reading a book in an armchair in a way that without anything in there they might not be able to see, and it might not sell the job if they can't see themselves living there. And that is the main importance of taking the time to stage your design, to add in the library objects and make it look like a livable scene.